Chapter 5. The Moaning Mountain. 9 Lays of Power. I learned from the famous Boltor, Bestla's father. He poured me a draught of precious mead, mixed with magic Ogrodu, waxed and throve well. Word from word gave words to me, deed from deed gave deeds to me. Havamal, words of the High One.
I wake up in darkness. It's warm, dry, and nearby. The wind roars, while water trickles soothingly from wooden shingles. I listen for a moment and fall back asleep. I wake up several more times, and it's always night. I open my eyes, but I see nothing. I lie on rough, thick furs, covered with something similar, softly treated, delicate like chamois on the inside, covered with a soft fur, like rabbit skin on the outside. I'm not tied up. I'm lying on a bed made of stripped logs, beneath a beamed wall sealed with something hairy and smelling of resin. Rain beats against the roof, splashes along the wall, and I hear the wind rustling through the treetops. I get up, instinctively trying to activate thermal vision, but nothing happens. I wrap myself in the soft fur and sit, trying to steady my dizziness. After some time, I begin to notice a faint glow from the hearth in the other corner of the hut. The outlines of the rafters, and the dark shapes of people sleeping, wrapped in furs on beds lined up along the wall. It smells of hay, smoke, resin, dust, and something like musk. I also see a door. It's closed with a sturdy wooden bar, but nothing else. No locks or chains. I slide the bar aside and carefully open the door. It creaks, but no one wakes up. Outside there's darkness, icy wind, and the constant splash of water. I relieve myself, then close the door. I don't know where I am. I don't know what's happening. But all that can wait until morning. For now, it's raining, the wind is blowing, and it's night. And I've worked hard. That's enough. I return to my bunk and wrap myself in the fur, feeling my muscles ache and tremble from exertion. I sink into a deep, velvet sleep where nothing happens. The nasty feeling that something is seriously wrong here lands in a folder labeled Later. I sleep. I wake up many more times, and it's always night. I hear the crackle of logs, hushed female voices, some unhurried bustling about. I see long-haired figures outlined against the fire. Bowls clatter, and the warm light of a clay lamp flickers. Outside, it's still raining, or the wind is howling. Heavy pieces of fur flap, covering narrow windows, and I can tell it's pitch black outside. Always darkness and foul weather that makes you want to sleep. So I wrap myself in furs and sleep. I fall into dreams full of battle and sex. I hear screams, the clashing of steel, blood splattering all around, and people dying. They charge at each other with a frenzied clatter of iron, the thud of blows on shields and wild screams, pain and the metallic stench of blood. Or there's darkness and hot, writhing bodies, moist lips and tongues, smooth thighs, and slim feminine hands roaming everywhere, fighting or sex, fury and desire, over and over, endlessly. I wake to the touch of soft, feminine hands. This time, I'm awake. This time, it's real. I'm lying on my back, one woman sits by my legs, the other kneels at my head, holding it in her lap. They're rubbing some ointment on me. The slick substance smells sharp and foreign, like old tiger, rancid musk, and a bit of camphor. Their hands glide over my entire body. Both women hum something monotonously. I want to reach out and pull one of them into my arms, but I can't move. I'm paralyzed as they rub the ointment into my thighs, my lower belly, and even further. I lie there like a log, unable to move a finger. Only my eyes. It's night. Rain pours, wind howls, their voices and hands work. And again, I'm flying over rocks and trees, where men rush at each other like dogs, steel crashes, blood splashes onto the ground, severed heads and limbs fall. Later, I fall into the arms of a tall, slender woman with narrow black eyes, like slits, and hair like writhing, bloody flames. At the next awakening, they give me something to drink. And again, it's night. I drink from the narrow end of a horn, once again with my head resting in a woman's lap. She strokes my forehead and whispers something. The drink is bittersweet, smelling of herbs. Each sip spreads warmth through my chest. And then again, blackness. I begin making progress because the next time I wake up, I'm alone, and I try to stand. It's still night. A fire burns in the hearth, and a lamp flickers. I sit on the bunk, shaking my head. It feels like it's full of shattered glass. The stormy, rainy night persists. I don't know if it's the same night or another. The hut is still in semi-darkness, but for the first time, I can see the women more clearly. Their tangled, long hair appears as black as the night outside the hut. One younger and one older. Like two drops of water with oval faces, dark eyebrows, and small, full lips. If not for their insect-like eyes, filled with gleaming pupils. Eyes like carbuncles, eyes like drops of resin, they would be quite pretty. Maybe sisters, or perhaps mother and daughter, though one seems barely 20, while the other is over 30. Here, that's possible. Here, people grow up fast, live quickly, and die young. But not here and not now. Here, there's only the rain beating the roof, the fire in the hearth, and dreams. Here, time does not flow. They call to me and giggle, but I can't understand a word. A shame. I'm given a bowl of soup, but I don't let them feed me anymore. It's cloudy, salty, and slightly sticky, reminiscent of Chinese seaweed broth. I drink spoonful after spoonful, feeling life return to me. But I can't ask them anything, and they can't tell me anything. I sit with a wooden bowl on my lap, modestly covered with the edge of a fur, spooning soup made from horn, while the girls sit beside me, repeating something monotonously. The younger one strokes my face, the older one my thigh. I like it. I don't know what's going on, I don't know why this is happening, but I feel like I've found myself in the best situation since landing somewhere near the cliffs beyond the wastelands of dread. Yet a sense of unease stirs. My mind begins to wake. Why is it always night? I ask. They laugh. Who are you? How long have I been sleeping? They laugh even more. And that's it. They couldn't understand me anyway. Instead, they unlace their simple linen dresses and pull them over their heads. I don't protest. I'm not used to such treatment, but I won't argue. The log bed is wide enough. And then we fall asleep. Outside, the rain weeps. At my next awakening, I manage to become slightly more aware. I step outside briefly to relieve myself, and of course, it's still night, but this time with a mix of snow and rain. But after returning, I no longer feel as if I've spent 16 hours toiling in a quarry. That night, for the first time, I catch a word. From the stone-like babble the girls produce, I pick out a throaty sound that flips a switch in my brain. I recognize the familiar sound and breathing. The word means something. Wahta, something like that. Wahta, I repeat. Water. Or, of this water. No. It would be more like wahtaks. They rush to me immediately. The older one kneels before me and grabs my hands, then touches my lips with 2 fingers. Water, I say.
Water.
They exclaim, one after the other.
Water.
The younger one brings an entire jug. I drink. The next word, I don't understand. But I repeat it several times, as accurately as I can. They correct me impatiently. I repeat it again. And suddenly, one time, the word hits straight into my language centers, as if it had kicked the door open. Vhaskjadlar. A jug. The girl shakes the jug and shouts,
Jug.
I shout, jug! And water. If you think about it, this isn't the craziest thing happening here. I once knew this language. The memory of its words, grammar, and pronunciation should still reside in my memory and speech centers. The neural connections that allowed me to communicate in it should still exist. Whatever happened to Sifril, even if it left my brain and became a cartoon fairy flitting about. A fairy that, by the way, has disappeared somewhere. I listen to their voices. I know now that the older one is named Silga, the younger one Sinia. They talk a lot, speaking to me, laughing. It sounds like the clatter of a wooden mill with a water wheel, but amid the grinding, rattling, and splashing, recognizable sounds begin to emerge. Words. Words I once knew. So, I sit and listen to the mill, waiting for the words. I don't need to relearn them. Each new one simply falls into place, but it's going slow. I once had a vocabulary of around 30,000 phrases. If each awakening represents one day, and I regain 3 words each time, we'll all grow old in this hut before we manage to have a real conversation. I'm still weak. Not like at the beginning, but still. I continue to wake up briefly, then fall asleep again. Always at night, in complete darkness. I lose track of time and orientation. The fire dances, the soup bubbles in the cauldron, the girls talk and sit in the light of the lamp. I listen, repeat, and try to gather my strength. But as soon as I start to think and regain the clarity of mind, fatigue hits me again, and I fall asleep once more. I'm trapped in an endless rainy night. I divide my time between sleep, eating, the latrine that's part of the stone bathhouse, language lessons in the Coast of Sales dialect, and sex. I have no clothes, I don't go outside, and I don't know how long it's been since I last saw daylight. During brief moments of clarity, I begin to form my first sentences. So far, they're imbecilic. I eat soup good, thank you, but at least they're the first steps toward speech. I see daylight only in my dreams. There, I soar like a bird over mountains, among rocks, shrubs, and dry grass. Invariably, I end up where steel flashes and blood sprays, as if something is pulling me there. However, since I started regaining the language, something has changed. A woman appears in my dreams again, tall, almost my height, dressed in a short tunic and leather armor reinforced with plates, with hair like fiery blood streaming from under a deep helmet. She holds a spear with blades on both ends of the shaft and an oval shield. She always stands among the fighters, arms outstretched, while a massacre unfolds at her feet. No one sees her. She smiles mysteriously, her lips parting ecstatically as blood from a slashed throat sprays across her face.
2 blades,
She says to me, showing the spear.
2 blades, life and death. Both wound. Do you see?
She speaks slowly and clearly, in simple sentences, almost fragments, but even then, it takes a moment for me to understand.
2 blades,
She repeats.
love and battle, both wound. Do you see? That's me. The same fire in the veins, fury and Semjolklinga.
I didn't know that word before, but its meaning is easy to guess. I can tell it's obscene, just like the gesture that accompanies it.
I am Hatrin,
She says.
the human flame, the one who burns the soul, who gives and takes life. Look,
So I look at the massacres, the rapes, and the people consumed by wild lust in secluded places, in barns, among rocks and forest peaks. It's always passionate, insane, and violent. Women and men tear off their clothes and then hungrily devour each other's bodies as if they want to tear one another apart. Hatrin extends her strange spear, the shaft and the blades pointing in both directions.
you can choose. Life and death, both wound the same. Do you know the answer? Can you choose?
I can't, so I wake up without knowing the answer. In truth, I don't even know the question. When is morning? I ask the girls. I ask often, but I never get an answer.
Shh.
A slender hand covers my mouth.
No need. It's night now. It's quiet now. Safe. Bad people sleep. They don't walk in the mountains at night. It's safe now.
Who is Hatrun? They jump away from me with a quiet gasp, covering their faces and hiding in the corners.
Don't say that name.
They hiss in a whisper.
Don't call her yet. Now you are ours. Now it's peaceful and quiet. There's fire and a roof. There's food. Don't call her. Blood and pain follow her. Don't call. She's wandering somewhere in the mountains. It's a bad time, the war of the gods. So much blood, so many tears. She enjoys it. It's her time. Come,
The younger one extends her arms.
hold me. Don't think about her. She's like a knife that cuts from both sides. She laughs when blood and tears flow. Don't call her. Better take me.
There's not much to find out this way, but hey, at least I'm learning the language. Once again, we meet on the battlefield, an empty valley strewn with bodies and shattered weapons among the rocks, where Hatrin reigns. She sits on a stone throne with a high back, legs crossed, one hand on her shield, the other holding a spear propped with one blade on the ground. Fog swirls around in thick curls, and crows caw, looking like black splatters across the sky.
You need a key.
Hatrin says.
Why do you keep closing your eyes? Look.
She jumps down from the stone throne and picks up a skull from the ground.
Look.
She yells.
What is it?
Death, I answer.
No.
She screams.
See what it really is? Can't you see it's just a stone?
The shiny, yellowish skull in her hand turns gray and porous, heavy, a carving made of granite.
What is it?
Hatrin asks.
Can something that has never lived be death?
That can be death too, I reply.
Blind fool. It can't be death. It has a bird inside.
The stone skull cracks open like an egg, and from inside, a white, plump bird resembling a dove flies out, flapping its wings into the sky.
What is it?
Hatrin insists. Life? I'm tired of these games. In reality, I wouldn't be this patient.
Yet it's just a stone.
Hatrin grits out. The dove suddenly plummets with a heavy whistle, crashing to the ground, motionless and gray, shattered into several pieces. It becomes whatever you want, I say.
And you? What do you want?
I think. I want to kill Van Dyken. For many reasons. I want my sword. More than anything, I want to retrieve my belongings and Jadrin. But do I truly want that? I want to find my survivors and complete the mission. I want to return to Earth and find Deirdre. Is there one thing I really want? One that matters? To finish my task and keep my humanity? The mist around me freezes into thorny frost. Some invisible force yanks at the rocks, pulling stones into the air, while dead, outstretched crows fall lifeless. The fallen warriors start to scramble to their feet, clutching their heads, screaming in horrible, lifeless voices. Shape-shifting phantoms emerge from the boiling icy fog. Deirdre, Van Dyken, then a horse with a crow's head. And they all scream. Enough! Hatrin shouts.
One thing. You can't want everything.
The tornado quiets. The fog still swirls as it did before.
Look.
Hatrin calls, extending her hand toward me.
What is an apple?
A fruit, I reply dully.
Fool. What is it?
She inspects her hand, as if seeing it for the first time. She watches and speaks, but now I don't understand a word. A stream of monotonous words. It doesn't sound like a spell, more like she's giving an exaggerated explanation of the apple in some strange language. It goes on for a moment until recognizable words begin to surface in her tirade.
Sugar. Skin.
And more babble.
Something. Something. Water. Something.
Her hand is covered in frost. Needles of ice circle her feet. The grass crumbles into dust. The earth trembles slightly. And then, in a brief flash like lightning, an apple appears. Well, an apple. Or rather its local equivalent. An oval fruit with dark green glossy skin speckled with orange spots. Yet, it rests in Hatrin's hand, fragrant and shining. Just like in a dream.
Now you.
Hatrin shouts.
What is an apple, don't you know?
These mystical riddles are exhausting me. Am I supposed to find the essence of an apple? The core of its appleness? The Tao of apple pie? Am I supposed to become an apple? Or worse, an apple tree? A strike hits me from nowhere, like a taser, knocking me to the ground amidst corpses, rocks, bones, and shattered swords.
Fool. Were you trying to change yourself or summon an apple? Get up. Stand and extend your hand.
I get up and extend my hand. What is an apple? I remember apples. Yellow, red, and green. I can smell the scent of apples in my nostrils, feel the waxy skin, the crisp, white flesh crunching between my teeth, the juice. My jaw tightens. Something sour fills my mouth. I gag, and another jolt strikes me. Chastened, I scramble to my feet and obediently stretch out my hand. Something tells me this isn't just a regular dream.
What is an apple?
Hatrin repeats patiently. Fine. What is an apple? It's a fruit, of course. A pome fruit from the rosids family. This particular apple belongs to one of the hundreds of cultivated varieties. But what is it? Essentially, it's a spongy mass of cellulose and pectin, filled with water dissolved with minerals, plenty of fructose and glucose, and starch. I see in my mind the spinning chains of sugar molecules, the polymeric starch molecules, the unique combinations of organic compounds. But an apple is also the spark of life. Living cells that grow from the fruit's ovule, expand, swell, enveloped in layers of starch, protecting the seeds nestled inside their core. Miniature bombs full of genetic potential, waiting to fall to the earth and explode into a tree. The thick layer of flesh surrounding them is bait, evaporating aromatic compounds saying, "Eat me." All designed to ensure the seeds travel through the digestive system of whatever takes the bait, landing in the soil with a fresh heap of fertilizer. I pull back, the tangled branches of large organic molecules retreating into the distance, forming cells filled with juice and flesh cloaked in skin. An apple. There's a flash, a crack like a tiny lightning bolt. I feel a jolt in my hand, and there, resting on my palm, is an apple. An earth apple. Red, ripe, firm, fragrant with sunlight. An apple, I say to Hatrin. Look! I lift it to my lips, but before I sink my teeth into the skin and tear away a crisp piece of flesh with a crunch, I wake up. And once again, it is night. The girls are crying.
She found you.
Silga weeps.
Our time is up.
She clings to me, hugging me tightly as if I were someone dear to her, or as if she were saying goodbye. She sobs desperately, pressing her whole body against mine. I stroke her back, kiss her wet cheeks, and feel her trembling. I watch as they sew by the firelight. They are making men's clothes, linen pants, a shirt, a woolen vest, and a sheepskin coat. They work quickly, their movements swift and skilled, almost enviably so. The bone needle flashes as it weaves through the fabric, and thick wool is knitted into long, knee-high socks. Actually stockings, to be precise. At least they'll be warm. Senia kneels on a fur near the hearth, surrounded by pieces of leather, a wooden-handled awl, and a small hammer. She's making boots. Large ones, soft leather ankle boots, at least size 45, just for me. Their hands move with urgency, heads bent over their work, only pausing now and then to wipe away tears. Otherwise, it's quiet and calm. The wind howls through the chimney, firewood crackles softly, and the rain continues its steady, monotonous drumming. But the calm feels unnatural, artificial. Something lingers in the air. I sit, staring into the fire or watching Sinia and Silga's nimble fingers as they hurry. It's as if the eternal rainy night outside is coming to an end. Hatrin is waiting for me at the same mountaintop as before. The wind blows her hair like flames from a torch. She sits on her throne, silent. She only points at the sword lying on the ground. I pick it up, unsure of what to do next. I simply hold the weapon and wait. Hatrin begins to hum softly in a language I don't understand. Or maybe she's using difficult words I haven't yet remembered, or ones I never knew. The hilt in my hand feels smooth and cold. Then it begins to pulse, finally shrinking. I look down and see that I'm holding the tail of a snake. A living, black snake, coiling and twisting like a lightning bolt. The triangular shape of its head suggests venom glands by its jaws, at least on Earth. I've seen the local snakes here bite off pieces of flesh, while ours swallow their prey whole. The snake coils toward my wrist, so I whip it like a lash and release it onto the ground, stomping on its head. It all happens in an instant, and when my leg suddenly throbs with intense pain, I'm sure it bit me. No. The snake is no longer a snake. It's a writhing streak of fire and heat. My leg is in the fire. How do you do it? I ask, stomping and brushing off my pants. How do you change a weapon into a reptile?
The same way you got the apple.
She says.
You have to call the change, want it, and know exactly what it should be. And you need to be in a place where it can hear you. I can't tell you more. I can't tell you exactly. I'm not allowed to teach you.
You taught them, I protest. She presses her lips together and slowly rises. I see Hatrin surrounded by flickering light like the aurora. Her narrow, black-filled eyes suddenly glow with the cold brightness of acetylene flame. It lasts only a moment, a terrifying split second, before she sits again. The fire dims.
That wasn't me,
She says, clearly and deliberately.
and I don't think anyone like me taught them, though I can't be sure. I think they learned on their own. They're different from you, even though you're the same kind. You see the world as it is and try to deal with it as best you can. You prefer to act. When you see something you don't understand, you prefer not to touch it. You turn away and leave. You'd rather not touch it than break it. You believe only in what matters to you, what can be used. They are different. They don't want to pass through the world. They want to change it. They don't care whether they understand something or whether they destroy it, because they're so certain of their wisdom. They believe in words. They describe everything with words. Action doesn't matter to them. They think, but don't bother acting. They act incidentally. They want change, even if it were to be sick. You hate change. They live for it. They will never hesitate to summon change, no matter what happens. That's the difference between you and them. That's why they turn the world upside down, and you can't handle a simple apple.
If you're one of the gods of this world, why don't you destroy them?
It doesn't matter who I am. That won't help you. I'm not allowed to change anything on my own. I'm not even allowed to tell you more.
I've seen the gods of this world before, in a dream. You were there too, Hatrin, in the cantina at Alhama.
Don't worry about dreams.
She shrugs.
If you don't know what you've seen, it's better to forget.
How could someone cage you? I saved you, Hatrun. You were smaller, more human, and I saved you. She snorts and takes off her helmet.
It was more like I saved you, and I still do. Remember this. See the world as if it were a thought. I can't teach you anything else.
A thought, like a dream, an illusion?
An illusion? No, that's not it. The world is real, but everything is both a body and a thought.
Why can't you speak clearly?
Because I'm not allowed. Those are the rules.
What happens if the rules are broken?
The balance will collapse. A real war of gods will begin, open to the death, not like it is now. Or the world will have to be reborn. The storm of forgetfulness will come. The dead snow.
Of course you won't tell me what that means.
You can only survive if you don't know too much. These things don't matter to you. Be content with having allies, but they can't help you. You have to manage on your own.
If you can't answer me or teach me, who can? She shrugs.
Some human, perhaps, if you can find them. Go straight north through the forest, then east along the mountain ridge. You'll find a cottage where the great song singer lives, Bonswift Both Bears. People come to him from afar for advice. Maybe he'll teach you something. Go to him and tell him you want to learn the songs. Maybe he'll agree.
When I wake up, I'm not sure whether I really spoke with her in the language of the Coast of Sails, or if it was just a dream. The girls slowly finish their sewing and begin the final fittings. I put on boots, pants, or the vest, while Silga kneels beside me with large pins in her mouth, making adjustments. Later, we have dinner, but everything is cloaked in a strange, tense atmosphere. They both talk to me, try to joke, but their eyes glisten with unshed tears. When they leave for a moment or turn away, I see them furtively wiping their eyes. There's an undefinable sense of impending sorrow in the air. It feels as though someone is about to die. Later, in the dark among the firs, they alternately cry and cling to me with desperate passion.
Remember us.
I hear whispers.
I'm Silga. Remember? It's me, Cinia. Remember Cinia. She's coming. She wants to take you. Remember?
I fall asleep to those whispers. No nightmares, just a deep, solid sleep. I see it through a hole in the roof. Through many holes. The roof looks like a sieve. Rotten shingles hang from decayed beams, and I'm lying among moss, moldy straw, and stiff, mildewed remains of furs. And bones. A small, yellowed skull grins at me from just beside my face, staring at me with hollow eye sockets. I leap up as if burned. The skeleton's leg draped over my side falls apart, everything clattering in a grim, eerie rattle. The apple falls from my hand and rolls across the moss-covered floor. An earth apple. Red, fragrant, full of Styrian sunshine. For a terrifying fraction of a second, I thrash among ribs, vertebrae, and femurs, small hand bones scattering over my shoulder. I disentangle myself from the decayed cot and leap outside with a scream, shaking myself off as if covered in insects. It takes a few moments before I stop trembling, stop hopping in a ridiculous dance, and calm down.
He stood in a small, fern-covered courtyard in front of a collapsed, ruined cottage resembling a dead animal. The outbuildings on either side were in even worse condition. The barn had long been consumed by fire, and the stable looked as if it had been used for artillery practice. The sturdy gate in the palisade had apparently been smashed long ago, perhaps hacked apart with axes. A piece of the gate still hung from its hinge, while the rest, reduced to rotting beams, lay among the ferns or had disappeared entirely. It took him several seconds to snap out of the shock and fear. Then he stood there in bewilderment for a good minute, trembling. Finally, he came to his senses. He realized he was cold. A minute later, he went back inside the cottage. The interior, despite everything, seemed familiar. The same bunks built from logs ran along the walls between wooden pillars, the same hearth in the middle, now partially covered in moss, cold and dead. He touched the old coals, which had almost turned to soil. A chain with a hook still hung above the hearth, meant for suspending a kettle. He himself had hung that kettle no later than yesterday. Yet the hook was rusted, as were the links holding it. No fire had been lit here for a long time. Years, or at least a year. The bed he had jumped out of hadn't been used for a long time either. The bones mixed with scraps of skin lay scattered as he had flung them, but between the ribs a young sapling had sprouted, a self-sown seedling.
Even if I had wandered here in some completely deranged state,
He muttered.
and decided to sleep in this wreck, there's no way I could have tangled myself into those skeletons like that.
Everything pointed to this being an entirely abandoned cottage. There was no sign that anyone had lived here for weeks. He remembered the apple but couldn't find it. It had vanished. However, he did find clothes. New, freshly made and neatly folded on the ground, with boots placed on top, as if awaiting inspection. Pants, a shirt, a vest, a warm cloak with a hood, the same ones he had tried on just the night before. He recognized the stitches, the patterns, the embroidered ornaments. He had literally held them in his hands just a moment ago. He stood over them, staring in bewilderment, unable to decide. Finally he sighed, knelt down, and reached for the boot. He stroked the cloak.
Why do I have the growing feeling since this morning that I'm losing grasp on reality?
He asked himself, and decided to get dressed. The last thing he remembered before the eternal rainy night was snow, pain, and a blurry, dazed vision of an archer standing in the doorway of a guardhouse with a drawn bow. The next thing, according to his understanding, should have been the credits rolling or the gates of paradise. He felt himself all over, but found no trace of an arrow. There were no injuries at all. The bruises and cuts had vanished, even the chafing on his feet from the uncomfortable shoes. In fact, he felt quite well. Most notably, the scar from the spear no longer bothered him. What's more, it now looked like a normal human scar, rather than the gnarled wound on the trunk of a tree. At the foot of the bed, he noticed an old, half-rotted chest with rusty iron fittings. Using a stick, he brushed away the impressive spider webs, knocked off the thick layer of dust, opened it, and found his own belongings inside. The same ones he had worn at the mountain pass and in the Valley of Dragons. They looked just as he remembered, but the overgrown chest suggested they had been stored here for years. He pulled out his modest equipment, delighted to see his large Nordland knife, his damaged bow with its bindings, as well as his pipe and some remnants of tobacco. The metallic pouch, with its precise inscriptions and illustrations, now seemed foreign and strange. He took everything, and at the bottom of the chest he found an old sword, still in its scabbard, along with a belt. He pulled it out, examined it critically, and concluded that after some cleaning with ash and sharpening, it would do. It wasn't nearly as good as his former weapon, but it was far better than the flimsy sabres of the people of fire he had been lugging around. Suddenly, he remembered the girl from the pass. She looked like Hatron from his dreams, but that didn't prove anything. He fastened the belt, rolled up the old scavenged cloak, and tossed aside some of the rags and scraps. He buckled on the sword and slung the new cloak with the hood over his back.
"Thank you, Silga,"
he said quietly, feeling a strange tightness in his throat.
"Thank you, my sweet little Cinia. I promised I'd remember, and I won't forget."
He turned and left without looking back. Carefully, he passed through the gate that had been shattered years ago, and after a moment of thought, headed toward the forest. Cyphril caught up with him immediately as soon as he stepped beyond the enclosure and stood on the open field, futilely searching for the sun.
Where have you been? How did I get here?
She shrieked with hysteria in her voice. Drakainen glanced at the sky and sighed.
"I don't know. I passed out. How much time has passed?"
Since when?
"Since we crossed the pass. You were still active then. You must have some sense of time."
You've been unconscious for 61 hours. What happened to you? Who was that woman? Where'd you get those clothes?
"I felt unwell. I had to lie down."
Drakainen replied sarcastically, though relieved. At least it hadn't been years.
"Which way is north?"
I was worried. I thought you were dead, you dumb brute.
"So did I. Where's north?"
Straight ahead, right in front of your nose.
"Thought so,"
he muttered.
"Thanks, Cyphril. We're going to meet someone. His name is All the Teddies or something like that. And that woman is probably a goddess, or something among the lines. Her name's Hatron. You'll definitely get along."
Cyphril just scoffed and flew ahead, like some idiotic, kitschy toy. From 10 meters away, she resembled a bizarre, oversized butterfly, and he could tolerate her now without constantly worrying about his own mental state. It began to snow.
"No surprise,"
he muttered to himself.
"Christmas is just around the corner. Yippee."
But deep down, a heavy, nagging weight settled in his chest, one that sarcasm couldn't mask. It felt as if he had lost someone dear. Snowflakes danced around him, clung to his face, and before long, his cheeks were soaked. The snow soon stopped. Deep in the forest, Drakainen found hair tracks.
"I need to fix this bow as soon as possible,"
he said, looking for a suitable stone.
"Restore aiming assistance,"
he commanded Cyphril firmly. The notional hare stood upright about 15 meters away, listening warily for a while. It looked more like a miniature kangaroo with a slight hint of capybara.
You can't possibly want to kill it.
Cyphril said, appalled.
It's cute.
"I'm sorry,"
Drakainen whispered patiently.
"I'd much rather hunt something repulsive, but right now, this hare is all we have."
Don't you dare. You're going to kill that sweet little creature just because you're hungry?
Aiming module, Cyphril, please.
You're atrocious.
And hungry. What's more, I have absolutely no food.
Go ahead and throw it yourself, but I'm not helping.
Drakainen muttered something in Finnish. Meanwhile, the hare prudently disappeared.
Where did you even come from?
Vuko called out in frustration.
It's impossible that something like you is in my head. I don't stand a chance of surviving.
He hurled a stone at a tree and hit exactly where he aimed, with the precision of a rifle shot. Sifril puffed up and flew off. By the time he climbed the ridge, it was already afternoon, and the peak was shrouded in mist. The path ran along the crest, and it seemed fairly easy going. The trail could even accommodate horses, and was clearly travelled. After about an hour of walking, the trail led him downhill, and around a bend he saw a small valley. Round, surrounded by trees, with a stream flowing through it and cascading further down behind a rock ledge, sending up clouds of mist.
Hope this is the place,
he said, carefully descending over the rocks. At the bottom he found pillars. They encircled the valley, spaced about 15 meters apart. Old, weathered menhirs, covered with precise carvings of intricate symbols. Between the stones, totems made of crooked poles were adorned with constructions of feathers, leather strips, and small bones, like some kind of Native American dream catchers. Each pole was topped with a skull.
Charming,
Drakanen muttered.
I don't expect anyone to greet me with flowers, but why can't it ever be something neutral? Say, a fish or a garden gnome.
He circled the valley along the line of menhirs, noticing scattered bones among the rocks and moss. A sparse trail of remains stretched along the entire border of the valley. There weren't many, just a skull here, a pelvis there. Not all of them were human either. Further in, nestled against a rock face, was an old hunched hut, covered with a thatch of ash twigs. Smoke was gently rising from one side. There was no palisade protecting the homestead, which was curious in itself. Near the waterfall, he found a cleared circle of stones, a cold fire pit, and a pitiful attempt at a shelter. He dropped his pack there and returned to the menhirs. He stood there for a moment. Then, finding a large stone, he hurled it between the stone pillars. The stone rolled along the ground, but nothing special happened.
That didn't do much,
he muttered.
In any case, I'm not sticking my hand in there. Could you fly between those pillars?
He asked Sifril.
Veda Katine!
She snarled.
I was just asking. If I had that rabbit, I could toss in a piece and see if it reacts to protein structures. Best would be to chase a live one there.
Only sulky silence answered him. The creature appeared out of nowhere, from the direction of the cabin and the slope, as if it had slipped out of the rock. One moment there was nothing, and the next it was charging, letting out a guttural howl. Sifril screamed. Drakanen thought it looked like a massive, deformed bear. The thought flashed through his mind as his hand had already reached for the sword, holding it at his side with the blade slightly backward in a wakigamai stance. He didn't even notice when he drew it. His fingers did not fit around the too short hilt. This isn't a sword for Kenjutsu, he thought. I'll need to work on my reflexes. The next second, he realized it couldn't be a bear. First of all, it was smaller. The bears here resembled cave bears and reached ridiculous sizes. Secondly, the charging beast was mostly running on two legs, occasionally using one hand to steady itself. It reminded him vaguely of a gorilla, but it was too big for that, and had a shorter snout. Drakanen watched its coarse, reddish fur ripple, noting the unsettling glint of intelligence beneath its pronounced brow ridges. He felt the vibrations of its steps through the ground. Slowly, he drew a breath through his nose and adjusted his grip on the hilt. He stopped thinking about the lack of hyperadrenaline in his veins, about his scout's sword currently carried by some scoundrel, or the half-ton creature barreling toward him like a hairy locomotive. He became an empty space, a void filled with infinite possibilities, stretching from the top of his head to the tip of the blade. The creature made a wild leap, landing right by the menhirs. It stood to its full height and let out an ear-splitting roar, followed by guttural hoots. A rank, hot stench rolled over him, like a mix of rotting beans, carbide, and carcass. Yeti, Drakanen thought. A spitting image. The Yeti hopped in place, tearing up handfuls of grass, issuing wild roars and bearing a horrifying set of teeth. But either it didn't want to or couldn't cross the line of the stone pillars. It thrashed around like a dog at a fence. Vuko stood for a long moment with the sword in his hands, feeling like a coiled spring.
So what?
He asked impatiently.
Are we fighting or not?
The answer was more roaring, frenzied dancing and stone throwing, but nothing decisive.
I think I met one of your relatives in the Wastes of Dread, Grendel.
Vuko taunted. Without taking his eyes off the Yeti, he sidestepped toward the campsite, keeping his sword parallel to the ground. The creature followed him with a few bounds, then stood and let out another howl, baring its teeth. The boundary marked by the menhirs, however, remained unbroken. Drakanen took a few more steps, then suddenly grunted,
Whatever.
turned around and walked away, without sheathing his sword. He remained alert, feeling as if the creature was still lurking behind him, but something told him the immediate danger had passed. He only sheathed his sword once he reached the makeshift shelter. Cyphril hovered motionless in the air, lying flat with her legs and arms spread out shamelessly, spinning slowly around her tiny navel. Her transparent wings, opalescent like an oil stain on the surface of water, hung limply. Drakanen sat down on a flat stone and untied his bundle.
Should I consider you've passed out, or is it a glitch?
He asked. The troll behind the menhirs was pacing back and forth, growling nervously like a zoo animal. Vuko unstrapped his quiver and pulled out his last 2 arrows. He found a suitable piece of wood and carefully shaved it down, then placed it between the arrowheads and tied it with the laces from his old boots. Afterward, he searched for a long stick, mounted the arrows with spread tips, tied it all together with more leather strips, and whistling, carefully descended the slope to the base of the waterfall. He returned half an hour later, visibly frustrated and irritated. Between the makeshift harpoon's arrowheads, a slimy, snake-like creature writhed, a grotesque, oversized leech with a disc-shaped sucker, where 3 jaws, resembling parrot beaks, emerged and retracted. It looked disturbingly like an intestinal parasite, but blown up to the size of a human leg. Vuko tossed the squirming catch onto the ground and shot Cyphril, now awake, a hard glare.
Not a word,
he muttered, and went off to gather firewood. He remained silent as he kindled a fire, casting sidelong glances at the Yeti standing by the stone pillars. The creature occasionally growled or barked in his direction, but it mostly seemed bored. It sat with a strange human-like expression of concern on its face, examining its thumb.
I lost my helmet on the pass.
Vuko grumbled.
It was a damn good helmet, and now I can't even fetch water or boil it.
Are you going to camp here?
Cyphril asked.
What else am I supposed to do? Call the front gate? I'm sitting and waiting for Mr. All-Damn-Bears.
He found a flat stone, and cursing, began the unpleasant task of gutting the slimy creature. As the evening deepened, the bizarre aquatic creature sizzled on a stick over the fire, dripping fatty drops into the embers. Cyphril had vanished somewhere. Vuko carefully pulled off a piece that seemed well cooked and slid it onto a leaf with his knife. He picked at the steaming grey meat, tossing it between his hands before blowing on it and taking a cautious bite.
Dear God,
he muttered indignantly, spitting the bite into the fire.
the first thing in this entire damn cosmos that tastes exactly as disgusting as it looks. Definitely not chicken.
He adjusted the remaining pieces, hoping that a stronger roast would improve the flavor. He sniffed his fingers and wiped them on the grass. Holding out his hand, he stared at it for a moment, mumbling under his breath. Nothing happened. The gloomy, dusky twilight was settling in. The waterfall roared in the distance. High above, the piercing cry of a hunting falcon echoed. Vuko turned his hand toward the fire.
Abracadabra,
He muttered gloomily, pulling his cloak tighter around himself.
Jabemto, Pichku Matarinu.
With the dusk came the fog, rolling in rapidly and eerily as if it had welled up from the depths of the valley. It spread in thick coils around the menhirs. The Bigfoot behind the pillars hunkered down, disappearing into the swirling mist leaving only its yellow glowing eyes visible. The beast let out a long, high-pitched wail. Another sound answered him, a low, bass humming, as if coming from the underground. Deep, full of infrasonic vibrations, almost below the hearing threshold. Drakainen straightened up, his hand moving instinctively to the hilt of his sword. He sniffed the air slightly. The fumes reeked of something strange like burning, and behaved differently than the cold mist he had dealt with before. The ominous hum vibrated through his skull and gut.
This isn't that mist,
Sifril said.
it's something else.
I can see that.
Vuko muttered.
That sound is coming from inside the mountain.
She added, clearly frightened.
From deep within.
I hear it.
Vuko replied, shifting his stance slightly as he drew his blade a centimeter from its sheath. A bright, brief flash, like magnesium igniting, sparked within the mist, first somewhere deeper, then again between the menhirs, and finally right in front of him, no more than 10 meters away. The humming stopped, and just where the smoke dispelled, suddenly stood a monster. With a fanged jaw and gnarled deer-like antlers, shapeless, covered in dark fur. Only after a few moments did it turn out to be a man. Short, thin, draped in a long fur coat, wearing thick furry boots that nearly looked like cylindrical fur drums, and an elaborate helmet adorned with antlers. The helmet's rim and the cheek guards were bristling with wolf fangs, giving the appearance that this person was looking from the inside of the maw of a wolf. He pointed a crooked staff at Drakainen, adorned with rattling charms and topped with a dried skeletal hand with protruding finger aiming directly at the scout's face.
Leave, fool!
The figure bellowed.
The gods are silent. The world is ending. Leave and hide before the snake swallows the sun. The time of fire is coming. The gods have risen against each other. Do you want to wake them? Do you really want them to notice you? Do you think they care about your sick cows or your pregnant daughter when they prepare for battle? Leave before they truly awaken. Fool!
A green, bright flame burst from under the figure's feet, and another cloud of thick grey smoke billowed up into the air.
You should have just said closed,
Drakainen remarked, mentally wrestling with his vocabulary. But once he started speaking, the words came easier.
and point this to something else. Could I borrow a pot and some salt?
Who are you, fool?
Asked the antlered man, bewildered.
Who are you to come to my solitude under the Moaning Mountain, empty-handed, pestering and mocking me?
Bonswift both bears, I presume?
Drakainen asked. The staff pointed at his face, lowered slightly.
I've come from afar. They told me you are the greatest song-singer. I mean, song-singer, and that you can teach me about the songs of the gods.
The mage snorted with laughter, looking at the scout like a discarded apple core.
You? It's supposed to be you? Get out of here, fool! You're too old. Leave. The charm spot will kill you.
He waved his staff northward.
From the land of fire, the land of salt grass, and the land of horses, people come to me and beg for help. Sometimes they bring strange children, those born with the songs of the gods in their hands, those who can tame beasts with their gaze from the cradle, who can turn the flight of a spear as soon as they start walking. And I send them away. I haven't seen anyone in years who could harness the songs of the gods. And you think you can? You? What can you even do? Are you a doer?
Maybe I am.
Drakainen said.
I come from far away. Among my people, there are many doers. I've seen Hatrun, the human flame, and it was her who told me to seek you.
Ah, so you're one of those who see the gods? Those come too, more and more recently. If you have silver, I'll give you herbs. Drink them in the morning and at dusk and sleep a lot. Then the gods won't come back, and you should take that sword to some forest shrine.
I don't want your herbs.
Drakainen replied tiredly.
I'll give you 2 gold coins if you teach me what you know about the songs of the gods. If I don't have the power of the doers, nothing will come of it, and you won't lose anything.
Run away, fool!
Both bears growled.
You have no idea what you're talking about. This isn't playing the bagpipes. One mistake will lead you to a terrible death. The awakened will smell your scent, boy, and they will follow you everywhere.
2 gold gwitchts, old man.
Bonswift abruptly turned and walked away. No words, no warning. Drakanen stirred the fire with a stick.
And now we'll move on to the kung fu movie scenes,
He remarked to Kifral.
I'll camp out here in the rain and snow, showing my determination and strength of character. After a month, the master will graciously allow me to serve him. I'll run back and forth with buckets to the waterfall, sweep his floor, and cook his rice. Wait, there's no rice here, so I'll cook acorns and stand on my head under the waterfall. Meanwhile, the master will secretly teach me, for the first few years, just how to boil an egg with my breath, until I reach enlightenment. Meanwhile, Van Dyken will conquer the whole planet and both moons, proclaim himself Emperor of the Universe and Pantocrator, and establish diplomatic relations with Earth. I don't have time for this nonsense. We're leaving in the morning.
The seer returned, indeed holding a small wooden bucket which he placed on the other side of the fire.
Fill it!
He commanded, gesturing with his head toward the waterfall. Drakanen stood up with a heavy sigh and headed for the bucket.
Wait, fool!
Bonswift called out.
Do you intend to fill it from the stream?
He asked with a crooked smile.
You're a doer, aren't you? Fill it without moving from where you stand. Stay there and make the bucket fill itself. If you can do that, I'll let you pass beyond the sacred stones. Fill the bucket and give me 2 gold gwitchts, and I'll tell you about the songs of the gods.
Drakanen stood up, looked Bonswift straight in the eyes, and slowly began to unlace his trousers. Bonswift's mouth dropped open in astonishment, while Vuko, without moving from his spot, filled the bucket and then laced his trousers back up. Both bears remained motionless, looking first at the bucket and then back at the scout.
It may not be full to the brim,
Drakanen observed.
but the point is it was filled using the method of a doer, without moving from my spot.
And then suddenly the rain came, a heavy, relentless downpour. Steam rose from the dying fire and water splashed into the bucket.
Pour it out!
Bonswift ordered.
You'll pay me inside. I'll let you past the sacred stones.
I'd rather not kill your pet.
Drakanen replied. Bonswift tucked his staff under his arm, pulled a bone flute from his coat, and blew a high-pitched, eerie wail that sent chills down Vuko's spine.
It's probably gone by now,
The old man remarked.
Knifelings don't like the rain, and don't think your arrogance impresses me. Glifnak would suck the marrow from your bones before you could call for your mother, and he'll do it with just a nod from me.
He glanced at the steaming remains of the campfire and Drakanen's rain-soaked dinner.
Where are you from, so that you eat mudworms?
He asked with a hint of disgust. Drakanen,
The inside of the
he asked with a hint of disgust.
The inside of the
Drakanen
cottage
glanced
feels larger
around,
than it looked from
but Tifral had
outside.
vanished.
It's different from the households I've seen so far. Not long and divided into big chambers, but octagonal, with one large room and a fire pit in the center. Bundles of herbs in wooden cages with birds hang from the beams, and ugly wooden totems line the walls. It reeks of rancid tallow, incense, and herbs. Bonswift carefully sets down his staff, removes his horned helmet, and hangs it meticulously on a wooden stand, where a lamellar half-armor is also draped. I don't see any tattoos or the hairstyle of the snake people. The sorcerer's head and temples are smoothly shaven, but long hair falls down his back from the nape of his neck. He's wrinkled, thin, and dried up, but still quite spry. For this place, he's easily in his 50s.
You'll sleep in the bathhouse,
He growls.
and give me your sword. Do people in your land sit in their hosts' homes armed?
He mutters something else that I don't quite understand. I reluctantly unbuckle my sword and hand it over, then place my bundle in the dark, stone bathhouse. The fire in the hearth is out, but it's still warm. I hang up my wet cloak, dig through my bundle for my pipe, pouch, and the remaining money I prudently collected around the tree trunk. It's not much. 2 gold coins, a few silver marks, some copper bits. This training is going to seriously damage my savings. Just in case, I also grab a spoon and a knife, though I'm not expecting much in terms of hospitality from my master. He's sitting on a wooden stool draped in fur, staring into the fire, holding an iron-bound drinking horn. There's only one stool, so I sit opposite him on a hairy skin. Bonswift takes a sip from the horn and extends his hand.
You promised me payment,
He says. I reach into my coat and toss him the 2 gold gwichts. He catches the coins, inspects them suspiciously, and bites the edge. What's the problem? That's good money. I minted it myself with a hand press back at Darkmoor Castle during blacksmithing and historical metallurgy classes.
I'll tell you how to summon the songs,
He mutters begrudgingly, taking another sip.
but I won't tell you how to tame them because no one can teach you that. They're alive. They know whether you're chosen and if they should obey you. They were stolen from the gods and are obedient only towards them. There are wild horses in this world. Sometimes someone manages to put a saddle on one and ride it, but most often they're trampled, and the horses remain wild. There are also phantom horses, the ones that gallop through the night when the great frost comes, who can carry away violent men and take them to the far land where the Lady of Winter dwells. Those are the horses you want to tame now.
The fire in the hearth suddenly flickers like blades of grass brushed by the wind. A freezing gust sweeps through the room. Bonswift extends his hand flat over the fire pit and begins to hum. His hoarse voice repeats a monotonous phrase I don't understand.
The first lesson is this,
He finally says.
There is one force, the one that permeates the entire world, all things visible and invisible. It acts from within outwards, just as the heat from embers passes to the flame to the air to the kettle, and the kettle to the water. The embers, the flame, the kettle, and the water are visible things. How the heat from the embers reached the water belongs to the realm of the invisible.
I sit quietly. 2 gold gwichts are a lot of money. You could buy a horse, a sword, and sometimes even a small house. You could eat in taverns for months. It's a huge price for a first-year physics lesson on heat transfer. I try to open my mind.
Everything is connected.
The sage continues. The icy wind swirling around the room rattles the bone and leather ornaments, and the birds in the cages screech.
Everything is connected and is one. But knowing this is different from feeling it, and those who wish to sing the songs of the gods must feel it. They must awaken the shadow of their mind. Look, there stands a spear. It casts a shadow. You cannot reach for the shadow of the spear. But if you reach for the spear itself, the shadow of your hand will reach for the shadow of the spear. But your mind is like a hand that casts no shadow. You must awaken it if you want to reach for the shadow of things. Look.
He doesn't move, but I see his shadow on the stone wall reaching for the shadow of the spear. I glance back at him and see him holding the shaft. The weapon's stand by the wall is empty. Impressive.
That's how it works,
Bonswift declares with satisfaction.
There is one force, and there are places where it is awakened. These are the charm spots, sacred sites. The force is there, waiting. Outside of these places, this force fills our bellies with breath, makes flowers bloom or water flow. But there, on the charm spots, lies a fragment of it, lost by the ancient gods. Alone and wild, there it can do anything. You just have to tell it what. Sometimes it listens.
How do you tell it in a way that it listens? Are there special words?
Yes, you need a song of the gods.
Now we're getting somewhere. So I keep asking, where can I get a song of the gods?
It's not a ditty you can learn from some random person. It's a song sung by the gods themselves. It sounds different in everyone's ears. The charm spot sings it to your inner ears. Either you'll understand it or you won't. Either you'll sing it yourself and the charm spot will give you what you desire, or it will kill you.
And what can such a song do?
It can affect things, people, and animals. It's like hot wax in the hands of the song singer. You can move objects, even if they're far away. That comes in handy. You can reach for something out of your grasp, or alter the flight of an arrow or spear. You can bring down a person or an animal just as easily. You can call them from afar, or create something. You can even change their nature. It's also possible to bend the will of people and animals, but that's the hardest.
I've seen people changed by the songs of the gods, changed to resemble animals or plants, yet they remain human. He shakes his head.
Such things happen in distant lands, where powerful song singers live, those who can command the unborn in the womb to change their nature. We haven't had such people here for a long time. It's said that you can tie a pregnant woman to the charm spot. If she suffers, she may wish for her child to be protected, and sometimes the charm spot listens. The creature will be born, looking nothing like a human, but inside, it'll still be one. Around here, people kill for such things. Song singers like that are hanged on a dead tree, pierced with new spears, strangled with untreated hide, bound with iron chains, their heads severed with a sickle, and then thrown into the swamp to drown, pinned to the bottom with 3 spears. That's the law. But people animals from foreign lands can be sold if captured on raids. Anyway, sometimes they're born by themselves if they live too close to the charm spots.
He suddenly gets up and bustles around the room, quickly returning with a small jar, from which he shakes out a handful of shapeless lumps resembling amber.
Pick one.
He grumbles.
With your right hand. Now take the poker and stir the coals. Good. Now throw it into the fire.
I obey. The lump drops among the glowing embers and ignites briefly, scattering sparks. A thick red smoke starts pouring from the fire, dense like that from a smoke candle.
Put your right hand in the smoke,
says both bears. The warm, sharply scented smoke envelops my hand, swirling between my fingers, twisting into spirals and puffs.
That's enough,
says Bonswift. I withdraw my hand, and then he bends down and sticks his face into the smoke. He stays like that for a while, murmuring his monotonous chant. His voice rises and falls. It reminds me of the joik my Finnish grandmother used to chant. Whenever she was doing something monotonous, like supervising the cleaning robot, cooking, or performing some accounting miracles for someone online, she would hum the same mournful little tune over and over without beginning or end. Grandpa Väinämöinen would leave the house when she did this. Her joik drove him crazy. He claimed she wasn't even aware she was doing it. Well, but she was from Lapland. Bonswift stays bent over, humming with his face in the billows of smoke, until suddenly he starts coughing, his eyes tearing up. The joik breaks off, replaced by a rasping sound and a bout of whooping cough. I see him flailing about as if something invisible is holding him by the neck in the smoke. He braces his hands against the stone-lined hearth and pulls backward, but he can't move, even though the veins are bulging on his temples from the effort. For a while, I watch this idly, convinced it's part of the ritual. But the wizard is coughing like mad. I hear wheezing, and I begin to realize that both bears, thrashing more and more desperately and weakly, is simply choking. Yet before I can stand, the unknown force holding the mage in the hearth suddenly lets go. Bonswift flies backward, knocks over a stool, and falls onto the furs covering the floor, convulsing, coughing up red smoke, and clutching his throat with both hands.
Wah! Water!
He croaks.
There! In the jug!
I get up and bring him the clay jug. He drinks straight from it, doubling over in another fit of coughing every now and then. Eventually, he calms down and suddenly hurls the jug into a far corner of the dwelling, into the darkness. I hear the jug shatter into clay fragments.
Damn you! May the plague choke you!
Yells Bonswift enigmatically, apparently not at me, but somewhere into the shadows. He stands, still holding his throat, and stumbles to the corner, tripping over furniture and coughing with a wheeze. I hear him close the heavy wooden door with metal fittings and block it with a massive bar fitted over the hooks. He returns, still coughing from time to time, finally sits down, drinks from a horn, and breathes heavily. I remain silent, though I am curious who the plague is supposed to kill, and I am tempted to tell him that one should not keep their face in a fire. I wait.
Strange!
Bonswift gasps.
You come from very far away. You are so strange and foreign that maybe the charm spot will actually listen to you. You are both old and young, alive and dead, healthy and sick. But the strangest thing is that you don't want to be a doer. You come here and give me 2 gwitchts for the songs of the gods, even though you don't believe in it. You think yourself wise, yet you buy something you don't even want. I've never seen anyone like that.
I spread my hands helplessly. Fate, I sigh. Bonswift shakes his head.
You have no fate,
He says. I freeze and stare at him. I don't like this at all.
Either you'll die soon, or you are fate itself.
He replies, troubled.
But I think the charm spot will kill you. So I will say this. If you want to go your own way, take 1 gwitcht and leave. Then stay far away from the gods, charm spots, doers, and such things.
I sigh again. I'd gladly do just that. But times are coming when the song singers may have their say. It could be that they will rule over people. I'd prefer if everything depended on the reason of men and iron, as it always has. Then I would leave. But bad times are coming. I must learn the songs to stop them.
But because of this, you have traits that will immediately kill you when you reach for the songs. You are violent. You are ruled by anger and impatience.
He moves to the back of the room, shuffling things around, and finally returns with a strap and an old rusty horseshoe. I watch as he wraps it in the middle and ties a knot, then brings over a ladder and ties the horseshoe to a pole high up near the ceiling. He brings over a piece of hide and throws it on the clay floor.
Sit here, on the hide,
He commands. I sit down. The horseshoe dangles in front of my face. Bonswift takes out a tiny bone vial, like one for perfume, and pulls out a little stick, with which he lightly touches the horseshoe.
You must understand. You must tame your anger. Sit here and stare at the horseshoe. Stare at it until you can move it with your eyes. I've given it a drop of water from the charm spot. A tiny bit of the strength of the gods' songs. If you have the talent within you, you will be able to move the horseshoe. That's all. Sit until it moves as you wish. If you get tired, go sleep in the bathhouse. You can also help yourself to a bowl of porridge from the pot and a jug of beer. And don't eat any bugs here, especially when I'm around. But when night comes, bar the door of the bathhouse and don't come out, even if you hear something strange. Don't go outside either, because Glyphnock will get you. There's a bucket in the bathhouse that you so wisely filled, so if you need it, use it. You may hear strange voices and see lights under the door. You may also hear screams. Don't come out unless you want to die. Now sit and learn. From now on, don't bother me unless you make that horseshoe move.
The following days are probably the most boring of my life. I sit and stare at the horseshoe. When I get up, the mage is usually gone. Near the hearth, I usually find some leftovers politely left for me. Usually a piece of smoked cheese and some dried-out bread, or a bowl with a bit of watery porridge, maybe some sour milk in a jug. It's very kind. Other than that, I sit for hours, trying to move the rusty horseshoe with my eyes. Sometimes it seems like it starts to sway, but that's just an illusion. It's moved by light air currents, or my eyes are playing tricks on me. In any case, nothing supernatural happens. Bonswift is wrong. I'm not impatient. I have endless patience, the patience of a sniper, the patience of a scout, the patience of a stone, the patience of a tree. I can lie in ambush for days and nights under tufts of weeds, pretending to be a clump of bushes. I can ignore boredom, cold, and the insects biting me. I can sit and try for hours to move the horseshoe with sheer willpower until the back of my head and eye sockets ache. It's not about impatience or anger. It's about the fact that I can't accept the mystical force that supposedly permeates everything and should move the horseshoe, just because I want it to. It's contrary to all my experience, grotesque and absurd. So I sit stubbornly, and the horseshoe remains a half-kilo piece of iron hanging on a leather strap. Mass, gravity, friction, and subatomic forces stay at their due places. My sight is not a physical interaction that can affect those parameters in any way. It's not a force at all. It's only a capacity to register light waves. It's a passive phenomenon. It works inwards, not outwards. And yet I sit and stare at the horseshoe. I am stubborn. My disbelief has nothing to do with it. Somewhere, barely some dozens kilometers away, there is a man who apparently can influence matter with his will. An extremely dangerous man. To neutralize him, I need to understand his capabilities. He turned me into a tree. In a matter of seconds, he changed my body into an entirely different tissue with entirely different properties. And then something else happened, and the whole process was reversed. A man, a tree, a man. My God, a man. I killed Duval. He was a tree like me, and I killed him. He begged me to. I squeeze my eyes shut and wait for the nightmare in my soul, suddenly flaring up like a signal flare to burn out. Until it burns completely. I try to think about something else. There, in the valley, in the music hell, I might have been under the influence of hallucinations or illusions. But I feel like this line of reasoning leads nowhere. Human tissue and tree tissue are completely different matters. Different cells, different proteins, different sugars, different structure and composition. And yet a double transformation was possible. There and back again. I wasn't irreversibly petrified, and that means something happened at a level beyond atoms, chemical compounds, bonds, biosynthesis, and physics. The change occurred at a level where all of that becomes secondary, somewhere deeper. At a level where a being biologically born of Anita Ostrowska and Aki Drakainen can just as easily be made of bones, muscles, and blood as of cellulose, pulp, and phloem. It's as insignificant as whether I'm wearing pajamas or a wetsuit. This is a level of the existence of matter and energy that most locals don't handle very well. Whereas a visitor from the other end of the universe immediately became a virtuoso. Despite his knowledge of this world being limited to the language, a few sloppy theories, and a handful of scientific studies. So, it's not about the local mysticism. You don't have to be born a native shaman. It's not a matter of knowing the local physics. I sit and remain patient. But the horseshoe refuses to move. Concentration, visualization, clenching my jaw and bulging my eyes don't help. The horseshoe is just a piece of iron. It hangs on the strap and shows no intention to budge. In the back of the room, in the stone wall, which seems to be just solid rock, there is a heavy wooden door. It's always closed, blocked by a beam hanging on huge hooks. Bonswift doesn't even let me approach them. He doesn't answer my questions.
That's not for you,
He says.
We'll kill you instantly.
Sometimes, however, he takes the lamp, pulls up the chain and lifts one end of the beam, then slips into a dark corridor, from which a damp, cave-like coldness blows. He disappears for long hours like this. When he returns, he doesn't say a word. He sits, stares into the fire with a horn in hand, and gloomily pours himself more beer from a jug. I stare at the horseshoe. Sometimes I go outside, stretch my legs, take a walk in the fresh air, see something that isn't a piece of iron dangling from a strap of tanned leather. Snow falls and melts. The air is sharp and cold, like broken glass. It smells of the coming winter. Glyphnack sniffs in my direction, sometimes growls, but usually just watches me with those strange eyes, in which an unsettling spark of intelligence flickers. I ignore him. Sometimes he starts screaming and banging on the door, then makes a ruckus near the poles. That's when Bonswift puts on his coat, his strange helmet, grabs his staff, and goes out. He forbids me to show myself then. I'm left alone. I sit and stare at the horseshoe. Later, he often brings baskets filled with game, wrinkled dry sausages, eggs, and cakes. He drags in barrels of beer and flour. I start to understand where all the goods come from in the pantry, which is packed to the brim, located in a converted cave. Bonswift both bears renders services for the populace. He probably heals and gives advice. Every day he asks if I've learned anything yet, or if I want to leave. He still wants to return one of my gwitchts. He seems irritated by my persistence. Staring at the horseshoe. A psychological picture of human endurance and the meaning of existence. Difficult questions, to which the viewer gets no easy answers. For true connoisseurs, who are looking for more than mindless slaughter and rivers of blood. A story worthy of the 20th century masters of two-dimensional psychological cinema. The Golden Marmot at the Ulaanbaatar Festival. How am I different from Van Dyken and the others? I'm not a scientist. I lack an analytical approach to the world. The tendency to seek simplified model explanations. In a sense, the inability to distinguish the model from reality. The penchant for building theories, categorizing, keeping the mind in the world of abstractions. My whole life has been driven by adrenaline, experiencing, not analyzing. I am attached to literalness, to events, people, and places. That's what I live by. My attitude toward the world is fundamentally contemplative. I am a simple man. I also possess different knowledge, less rich, less organized, and probably overall less. But what my wizard friend from Amsterdam is doing doesn't seem reasonable, unless there's some theory behind it that I'm too stupid to understand. A refined philosophical point of view, which could be discussed for hours using jargon full of simulacra, derivatives, modalities, and conceptual designates, but which, in practice, boils down to primitive abuse of people, tyranny, and a power complex. The times when knowledge was a function of wisdom are long gone. Now it's a labyrinth of conflicting views at a high level of abstraction, where a model of the model is kindergarten stuff. Is this the mechanism necessary to become a mage? I stare at the horseshoe. At night, I really do hear strange sounds. Some wailing coming as if from underground, whispers, curses, imprecations, and sobbing. Sometimes screams. I don't mind them. I lock myself in my bathhouse, taking a lantern, some firewood, and a jug of beer. I suspect that Bonswift is making all that noise in a drunken stupor, or watching the magical equivalent of television. Some days he starts with draining a jug for breakfast, then tops it off with alternating doses of mead and beer, so by the afternoon, he's just swaying by the hearth with a drooping lip and bull-like eyes, barely able to stand. Meanwhile, I practice telekinesis, still stuck on lesson 1. Moving objects in one weekend. And I'm starting to worry about the state of my mind. I've begun to dream about the horseshoe. I dream that it starts to move. But these dreams don't provide any answers to the question of how. As a result, they bring no relief either. The next day, I stumble upon a commotion. People come when I'm outside. They don't see me, and Bonswift doesn't have time to herd me back into the hut. 4 men, not the snakes. They're armed and furious, but in a civilian way, I'd say. This isn't a war raid. They remain politely at the camping area in front of the palisade of menhirs, but they pace nervously back and forth, ignoring Glyphnack, who is putting on a whole show of enraged ape-man near the poles. Bonswift both bears goes out to meet them in his gear, helmet and staff in hand. But the conversation is different than usual. One of the men stands right by the menhirs, with his thumbs hooked in his belt, red-faced with barely restrained fury. He takes some kind of totem from one of his companion's hands, a tangle of strings, bones, and feathers, and dramatically throws it at Bonswift's feet. He speaks quickly, swallowing his words, so I only catch bits and pieces. I hear 3 black heifers, and then they killed my son.
The sacrifice of heifers protected your women, you idiot.
Bonswift retorts with the full dignity of a drunk, proud of the fact that he can avoid staggering if he really tries.
If you wanted to protect your sons, you should have offered a bull.
I have 10 bulls,
Shouts the enraged man.
and if it had been necessary, I'd given 100 if you'd told me. You said heifers.
I don't catch a few following phrases, but they're probably curses. The argument goes on for a while until the leader suddenly urinates on the nearest menhir, spits on the ground, and they all leave. After a few steps, one of them turns, jogs a few steps, and makes a throwing motion. The spear flies in a beautiful arc, and Bonswift freezes, watching with wide eyes as the blade pierces Glifnak's side. It all happens in a second. A terrible howl fills the air. The creature writhes violently, yanking at the shaft, but the spear has pierced him completely. The Yeti reaches behind him, breaks the shaft just below the blade, and pulls it from the wound. He crawls to the rock wall, packing snow onto the wound. I watch as the dark blood soaks into the makeshift compress, but there's less of it than I expected. It doesn't seem so bad. The blade mostly pierced the skin and seems to have glanced off the ribs. The Yeti is bleeding, but he's not coughing up pink foam. He's not suffocating. No other symptoms of collapsed lung. Bonswift still stands completely still, then finally turns on his heel and goes back into the cottage. "Why didn't you push the spear away?" I ask. Bonswift sits in his spot by the hearth, staring gloomily at the tangled fetish thrown at his feet.
Shut up.
He grinds out through barely restrained anger.
Who are you to lecture me?
Then suddenly, he turns towards the eternally closed doors.
No!
He yells stubbornly.
Shut up, and die already.
On the table by the wall lies a roasted venison leg. It's cold and partially cut. Without asking permission, I break off a piece from the end, a shank with a good chunk of meat on it, grab a jug, which I fill from the barrel set up on the stands, and return to my horseshoe without a word. I stare at the horseshoe. I gnaw on the meat, sip the beer, and sit on the rough skin, staring at the horseshoe. The horseshoe that suddenly begins to move. At first, it sways slightly from side to side, and then more strongly. I freeze, with my teeth sunk into the meat and the jug in my other hand, as the horseshoe swings more vigorously. I want to call for Bonswift, but I can't make a sound. I'm afraid the phenomenon will suddenly stop. Especially because I don't feel anything. I'm not exerting myself, I'm not focused, I'm not pushing it with my gaze. I'm just looking, and the horseshoe swings on its strap. Carefully, I think about changing its direction, and I see the piece of iron slow down slightly. Then its pendulum motion starts to fluctuate. The horseshoe begins to sway in an ellipse, then in a circle, and finally, it starts swinging toward me. The movement intensifies, and I have to tilt my head back and eventually move away to avoid being hit in the face. I glance to the side and see Bonswift both bears standing as if turned to stone. He's neither surprised nor impressed by my talent. Bonswift both bears is terrified. His face is pale, ashen, with half-opened lips and bulging eyes. He shakes his head slightly as if in denial, then starts backing away. I change the direction of the horseshoe's swing again because the back-and-forth motion is too bothersome. The heavy iron is about to hit me in the forehead. The song singer stands frozen for a moment, then sits down uncertainly, clutching his horn and jug tightly. The metal rim of the horn taps against the rim of the jug, then against my master's teeth. "I moved the horseshoe," I say, not very insightfully. "What now?" It strikes me that he might now ask me to move the anvil. He opens his mouth, closes his eyes, and shakes his head in denial. He mutters something like, "No, no, go away," and cradles the horn carefully in both hands. The cottage suddenly grows cold. I instinctively glance toward the door, then at the entrance leading to the cave, but both are closed. The birds begin to scream, and I hear the fetishes rattling and clinking around. Something topples over. After a moment, I hear a clatter and see the horn rolling across the ground. The wizard sits rigidly, strangely stiff, as if something has immobilized him and pinned his arms to his sides.
No, no, don't let him.
I hear. I stop the horseshoe with my hand and look at him, because it suddenly dawns on me that what's lurking behind the cave doors is Van Dyken himself. I stand up carefully, thinking about the sword I left in the bathhouse. Fortunately, I still have my knife. I thumb the suba, and the latch releases with a quiet click. If it's really Van Dyken, I won't even let him open his mouth. I used to be able to throw a knife accurately and quickly from over 5 meters. That takes much less time than saying abracadabra. I listen, but all I hear are the rustlings and clattering of small objects that have suddenly come to life. Is there a doer with fish eyes here called Aiken? But both bears is too terrified. He shakes and seems to have no idea what I'm talking about.
No, no Akin here. What eyes? No, not again, please.
A small stitching awl rolls across the low table in front of him with a rattle. A steel needle set in a wooden handle. Bonswift's face shows a tremendous effort. He turns red, the veins bulge on his temples, and it looks as if he's trying to lift the stool he's sitting on. But the effort comes from the fact that the mage is desperately trying not to lift the awl. In vain. His trembling hand reaches out as if against his will, and his fingers close around the wooden handle. A howl escapes the doer's mouth. He shakes his head wildly, and his desperate, "No, no, no!" starts to sound like barking. Fighting against himself, with his eyes bulging and veins throbbing on his forehead, Bonswift reaches out his other hand and slowly stabs the awl into it. The scream almost raises the roof of the hut. A terrible, desperate scream from his open throat. It goes on for a long time until the skin on the back of the doer's hand bulges, then suddenly releases the tip of the blade and a small stream of blood.
Fine, fine, I'll tell him.
He shouts desperately at the ceiling and walls, tears of pain streaming down his cheeks. Everything stops. Both bears pulls the awl from his hand, cradles it desperately, and holds it to his chest.
Tomorrow,
He moans.
tomorrow you'll go to the charm spot. Tomorrow. Now leave me.
It wasn't me who did it, I note timidly.
Of course it wasn't you, fool. It was Bonswift.
I walk back to the bathhouse, filled with worry and convinced I'm sharing a roof with a loony. We reach the charm spot at dawn, on a cold, misty morning, after a silent, gloomy breakfast. Bonswift is both frightened and furious, his hand wrapped in rags clearly hurting. I didn't sleep well myself, and I have no appetite. There's an unpleasant, nauseating knot in my stomach. To my dismay, I realize it's fear. The charm spot is a trial by fire. It's like a test flight, like Russian roulette. The journey takes us over an hour. We trek along the mountain paths until, in a place that looks like any other, my guide suddenly stops and points ahead with his bandaged hand.
Down there, beyond those rocks, there's a small, round dale. Go in and sit in the middle. That's enough. If you survive, go home. You can also grow smarter and leave. That would be best.
He turns and almost runs away. I inhale the cold air deeply. I look at the mountain chains stretching around me, like gray mastodons frozen in their march. I watch the jagged clouds swirling along the peaks. I sit on a rock and light my pipe. Slowly, I calm my breathing and heartbeat. I wait until the tiny figure of the song singer going back home disappears behind the rock's edge, and until I am truly alone. Then I stand, tap the pipe against the stone, put it away, and cross myself. I descend straight towards the heart of the charm spot.
Sifrol appeared as he was still descending the slope. Without a word, her little face set in determination, she floated right next to his head. Despite everything, he felt a little better.
No way around it?
She asked.
Without it, we don't stand a chance.
he replied.
We'll die.
Not necessarily.
He said through gritted teeth.
We won't go down that easily. Besides, do you want to live forever?
They continued down the slope, side by side. A man and a fairy. High above, the piercing cry of a hunting bird of prey echoed through the cloudy sky, circling the mountains like a reconnaissance plane. As it passed over the charm spot, it suddenly veered away, beating its wings sharply, and flew off elsewhere.
Even the animals won't go in there.
Drakainen noted grimly.
Look at the tracks.
The tiny prints were coughing heavily, sucking air through his nose and exhaling through his mouth. Ibuki. Any more of this, and he'd pass out from hyperventilation. He steadied his breath, early visible in the snow. They zigzagged around, but no creature had crossed the jagged circle of rocks. He realized he was braying.
Come on,
He said.
bungee jumping is worse.
He stepped between the rocks, placing his feet carefully, cautiously, as if on a minefield. And nothing happened. In the snow, in the middle of the clearing, stood a small, oddly twisted tree. And that was all. Its gnarled branches were covered in thorns as long as a hand, quite out of place on a coniferous shrub that resembled a dwarf pine. The tree itself was about 5 times too large. Drakainen stood for a moment, tense as a spring, ready to jump out if something started to happen, but nothing did. After a while he forced his stiff muscles to move and cautiously walked around in a circle.
Do you see anything?
He asked.
Don't you?
Sifril's voice was strange, dreamy.
It's beautiful.
He looked at her. The fairy was dancing in the air, trailing a streak of sparks, shimmering like diamond dust.
What's going on?
He asked. Still, nothing was happening. He knelt and carefully touched the ground with his hand. He brushed away a layer of snow and found frozen pebbles beneath, covered in patches of lichen. Nothing special.
Don't you see?
Sifral asked, her voice slow, like someone high on something.
I don't see.
It's in the tree. Go towards the tree.
He approached and carefully touched the trunk.
Yes,
Sifral said,
just like that.
and she exploded like a firework. Then the world shattered like a mirror into millions of swirling fragments behind which lay darkness. It exploded into myriads of rainbow-colored sparks. It turned into a shimmering cloud and then suddenly snapped back together with a crack. Drakainen stood in the middle of the clearing, tense and crouched, but apparently alive.
Careful.
Sifral whispered directly into his ear.
Don't think about anything. Nothing specific.
Where are you?
He asked in a trembling voice.
Where I always am.
She replied.
Inside you. Look around. Can you see now? Don't think. Don't desire. Just watch.
His hands, the sleeves of his tunic, and everything around him shimmered with microscopic sparks, as if dusted with diamond powder. He moved his hand, leaving a delicate trail that glimmered with rainbow colors.
Something's happening to my eyes.
Vuko said.
Yes,
She confirmed.
they've opened.
A glow surrounded his body, forming a circle under his feet and covering the rocks rising around him, like a shimmering moss. It also permeated the air, like a frosty mist in the heart of a Lapland winter. Like a veil of microscopic, sparkling ice needles rising in a column toward the sky.
Don't move.
Sifral whispered.
Don't think. Don't desire. Just watch.
So he watched. The shimmering cloud surrounding him had something hypnotic about it, like the images in a kaleidoscope, the dance of floaters on the inner side of tired eyelids.
Just a little longer.
Sifral breathed passionately into his ear.
Everything is fine. Just wait. Don't think. Watch.
So he waited. And he watched.
Don't be afraid.
He didn't respond.
Now.
She murmured.
I'll have to faint you for a moment.
What?
Shh. It has to be done. Don't be afraid. You'll be back soon.
What's happening?
He couldn't move. He stood frozen in a random position, petrified, as if he had become a tree again.
Quiet. Trust me.
He wanted to protest, but he went out like a candle. Darkness, broken by faint, flickering lantern lights. He sits with his legs crossed, naked, on a round disc, and cannot move. The disc is smooth like obsidian, like a black mirror, and it turns slowly. Around him, rocky walls of a cave rise in the darkness. He sees his own hands resting on his skinny knees, palms up. The rocky walls pass by in front of him, illuminated only by the faint glow of the flames. He opens his mouth, though he has no intention of doing so.
Yes,
He hears a foreign, creaky voice that echoes off the ceiling.
right now. It is done.
Darkness. And in the darkness on the top of the mountain a tree burns. A massive, roaring flame lights up the entire area. The trunk, branches and limbs are ablaze, violently and terribly, as if drenched in napalm. And it moves. The branches move within the sea of fire with a slow, desperate motion. Between them, a head with a wide-opened mouth can be seen. The tree screams. A terrible scream echoes through the mountains.
Yes,
Says a man in a hood.
burn them all.
More patches of orange fire bloom on the summit. The scream turns into a chorus. Darkness. And in the darkness, wheels, scythes and pendulums turn. The castle called Thorn spins against the backdrop of a purple sky, like a ghostly astrolabe. Blades and rims slice through the air with a deafening whoosh. Gears grind with a thudding crash. Steel parts collide, striking each other, locking into place, and from the swirling mass grows a steel tower, rising toward the clouds. The clouds part. The man on the tower raises in his hand a double-headed axe, its shaft entwined by snake bodies. The snakes, writhing, open their jaws on the blades, one on each.
Remember,
The man's voice is a thunderclap that lays itself across the mountains.
life and death are one. There are only snakes and carrion in the world. You are the snakes. The world is yours. It lies beyond the mountains. Take it. There is only one law. Do what you want, and if anyone stands in your way, crush them. Kill them all, and let the frost take the rest.
Darkness. And in the darkness lying over the mountain valley, drums are playing. Hollow, rhythmic, in a slow, nerve-wracking tempo. The sound of iron clanging and the shuffle of thousands of heavy boots can be heard. From the valleys surrounded by absurd peaks known as the Petrified Wonders, an army emerges. The army of snakes. Winding like a serpent, bristling with 1,000 gleaming stingers. At the front rolls a massive spiked wagon, a veritable fortress on wheels, painted with naive images of writhing snakes devouring the sun and both moons. It looks like a ghastly circus wagon. Darkness. And in the pitch-black night of a storm, in the roar of the wind, waves roll like moving mountains. In the valley between the waves, the prow of a black ship appears and disappears, its stern adorned with a wolf's head. The wolf, the ropes, the sides and the planks of the deck are covered in ice, gleaming dead in the dark. The waves break into foam, crashing onto the deck, yet the prow stubbornly cuts through the white, swirling water, continuing its determined journey over the crest of the next watery mountain. The wind howls, the rigging smokes with ice dust, but the ship sails on, stubbornly heading north. The deck is empty, as is the helmsman's post. Darkness. And from the darkness emerges a tangle of roots, like a mad tree that has climbed above the entire forest. A petrified tree, crowned with spiked towers, donjons, battlements, and balconies. A fortress stabbing the sky with 1,000 spires, but it seems dark and empty. Abandoned. Yet this is only an illusion, for someone sleeps in the fortress towering over the land. Around, in the settlements and villages lost in the forest, lights suddenly flicker in the darkness. Lights begin to twinkle in the windows. There are screams, barking and howling dogs, the sound of many feet stomping. People frantically running through the night close their shutters, You can hear them dragging furniture and barricading doors and gates. Wooden covers slam shut with a bang, and bolts grind into place. For in the castle looming over the area, someone sleeps, always sleeps. And now, they are dreaming a nightmare. Darkness. And in the darkness, on the tower's balcony, stands a grey-haired man wrapped in a billowing cloak. Below him stretches a stone city surrounded by walls, beyond which lies a snow-covered expanse, dotted with trees, bushes, and flowers. The leaves clink together in the wind like crystal chimes. The leaves, flowers, and branches are made of blue ice, gleaming like blades. And farther still, beyond the port, you can hear the angry roar of the winter sea. Waves explode into foam, crashing against the rocks, then spreading with a hiss on the shore, freezing into sheets of glass.
So, this is the end,
Says the man.
Good, for I've been waiting here. You will find me. You will. I am easy to find.
Darkness. A stifling navy blue desert night. Thousands of torches flutter in the hot wind, and a massive pyre roars, onto which people in leather half-armour and torn tunics throw bodies. A woman cloaked head to toe in a red robe, her face hidden in a hood, walks between two carpets of people. People kneeling with their foreheads pressed into the sand. Banners and torch flames flutter. The red loose robe also shimmers and flaps in the hot wind, like a flame, the fire of the desert. The light flickers on the clay walls of the houses, scattered and piled up haphazardly like heaps of abandoned boxes. The walls are splattered with fresh blood. So many. A whisper is heard from behind a mirrored mask. The figure walking beside the woman must tilt their head to look into her face, but they see only darkness in the hood's opening. How many more?
As many as necessary.
The voice from inside the hood is like the wind blowing from the heart of the desert.
Until they understand. Until the mother is satisfied. Until they feel the gentleness of unity. Until all injustice is made right. Until all becomes one.
The last word cracks like a whip. The figure walking beside the woman suddenly turns into a loose, empty robe that falls limply to the ground. With a clatter, the gleaming mercury mask falls and rolls over the stones. Only fine reddish dust spills out of the sleeves of the robe, drifting away on the wind. He lay with his face pressed into the snow and the cold pebbles. He stretched out his arms and rose. He spat out a pebble and some snow. Beneath him, the imprint of a human figure was visible in the snow. He looked at the stamp of his own face, which resembled a death mask. A white mask with red eyes. 2 drops fell, followed by more, burning red-tinged craters into the snow. He wiped his hand across his face and looked at his fingers.
Jebem ti dushu.
He groaned.
I'm bleeding from my eyes.
Yes,
Sifral said, sitting in the air right in front of his face.
but it will pass soon.
It will pass.
Yes, I've already set everything up.
I had some visions.
Side effect.
She reassured him.
Nothing serious.
What happened? What did you set up?
The charm spot.
She explained.
Or rather, I set up your brain. Don't worry, I didn't change anything. I configured you.
What the hell are you, Perkle?
I'm like an operating system.
She explained.
Now I've understood that.
Drakanen stood up and wiped his face with snow.
That's strange,
He said.
I feel good. Really good. Surprisingly good. Let's get out of here. Nothing more is going to happen, I think. Let's go. Operating system.
He stopped suddenly and looked at her.
What are you wearing? Stockings and high heels?
Don't you like it?
You looked natural naked. Now you look like a whore. Not that I don't like it.
He stopped again and approached one of the rocks. Embedded in the stone was a steel hook, from which hung a rusty ring and a piece of chain. Drakanen stared at it for a moment, then clenched his jaw and turned away. Blood was still trickling down his cheeks, leaving rusty streaks.
So that's how it is.
He muttered. Without a word, he passed the rocks and started back the way they had come.